Imagine a queen ruling over an empire, venerated by her subjects, praised by Shakespeare as the Virgin Queen, yet forcing foreign envoys to hold their breath because of the overwhelming stench emanating from her body. Elizabeth I, the monarch who defeated the Spanish Armada, built the Golden Age of art, and expanded England's influence, was also one of the figures with the most terrifying hygiene and beauty habits in European history. This was not a dark legend of the Middle Ages. This was a truth recorded in letters, diplomatic journals, and even the whispers of the court. Elizabeth's body, from her teeth and skin to her hair, decayed gradually, even while she was still alive. Elizabeth's troubles began with her teeth, a detail that seemed trivial, yet became a ghost haunting her entire life. From her 20s, the Queen was obsessed with sugar, that luxury imported from the newly conquered colonies in the Caribbean. For the English nobility of the 16th century, sugar was not merely a spice but a symbol of power, wealth, and sophistication. The more sugar displayed on the banquet table, the higher the status of the host. Elizabeth, ever a queen skilled in crafting an image of grandeur, could not resist that sweet white gold. But this indulgence planted the seed of a secret humiliation. Within only a few years, her teeth began turning a deep yellow, then rotting to black. By the age of 30, the proud smile of the Virgin Queen had become something foreign envoys discreetly avoided. A Spanish ambassador once wrote in a letter to Madrid, "When she smiles, it feels as if I am looking into a small graveyard, where broken bones lie, exposed in decayed earth." At court, this became a forbidden subject, whispered only behind velvet curtains. Loyal courtiers pretended not to notice, while her ladies-in-waiting whispered among themselves about the Queen's struggles at every meal. Chewing meat or hard bread turned into torture. The royal chef was forced to invent countless mashed dishes, from stews to thin porridges, so she could swallow without weeping at the table. The grand banquets, meant to display power, became silent tragedies, where Elizabeth concealed her agony with graceful gestures, sipping red wine to mask the taste of blood from her gums. Once, a brave royal physician advised her to remove a decayed tooth to prevent infection. Elizabeth narrowed her eyes and challenged him. "If you dare pull out your own tooth in front of me, I will consider it." The doctor, trembling, could not refuse. Before the entire court, he extracted one of his own teeth, screamed in pain, collapsed, blood pouring down. Elizabeth merely smiled coldly, her hand on her cheek, claiming it as a triumph of will. From that moment on, no one dared mention treatment again. Her obsession with decaying teeth drove Elizabeth to endless tricks to hide it. She stuffed rose petals, cloves, even chewed cardamom seeds to mask the stench. When receiving envoys, she ordered silversmiths to craft spoons, forks, and cups lined with silver, so that the metallic shine would reflect and make her teeth appear brighter in candlelight. But these ruses were only thin disguises. French, Dutch, and Spanish envoys still recorded in their journals the miserable audiences, where entire rooms seemed suffocated by the stench from the Queen's mouth. What was most terrifying was not only the rotten teeth. It was pride itself that prevented Elizabeth from admitting she was decaying. For her, pain could be endured, but revealing weakness before others was absolutely forbidden. That blackened smile thus became a mask of pride the Queen carried through the years of her reign, a testimony that her power was built upon denial and the rejection of her own body. If rotting teeth were a painful secret, then Elizabeth's obsession with water was a tragedy that lasted her entire life. In the context of the 16th century, when London was drowning in filth, open sewers flowing straight into the Thames, The fear of disease spreading through water was not unfounded. But Elizabeth, with her vivid imagination and innate suspicion, turned that fear into a kind of creed. She believed that water not only carried illness, but could also seep through the skin, flow directly into the blood, and make the body drown from within. From this belief, the Queen almost never truly bathed. The white porcelain tub, carved with golden angels, placed in the palace, was nothing more than a piece of lavish display. Servants rarely saw her step inside. Instead, each morning, her ladies-in-waiting used cloths soaked in wine, grape vinegar, or rose water to gently wipe her wrists, face, and chest, not to cleanse, but to create a fragrance to mask the smell of her body. This bizarre habit gradually became a kind of sacred ritual. Before the scented wiping ceremony began, a priest had to bless the cloth, as if it were holy water. Courtiers standing by were required to remain absolutely silent, for Elizabeth believed that noise could open the pores, allowing outside toxins to enter more quickly. The result was that her body odor grew increasingly overpowering. The many layers of gowns, sometimes 6 or 7, trapped sweat, skin oils, and grime. They soaked into the fabric and fermented, producing a sickly sweet stench like honey mixed with rotting flesh. A French envoy once wrote in a letter, "When approaching the Queen, I smelled a scent like roses buried in decay. Sweet, yet twisting the stomach." The bitter irony was that Elizabeth was extremely strict with others. She required all courtiers and ladies-in-waiting to be clean and fragrant. Anyone who revealed the vulgar odor of sweat could be banished from court for a week. Meanwhile, the Queen herself was drowning in layers of perfume and congealed sweat. Servants whispered that her nightgowns often stiffened from sweat and oils, standing upright like armor. On the rare occasions, she did bathe. It was during solemn ceremonies. The tub would be filled with rose petals, violets, marigolds, mixed with sandalwood oil, musk, and amber. But instead of changing the water, the maids simply added more fragrance when it turned cloudy, turning it into a foul soup. Elizabeth sat in it for hours, not scrubbing, not rinsing, but merely enjoying the scent. When she emerged, she was wrapped in satin cloths instead of towels, to preserve the divine essence on her body. One lady-in-waiting later recounted that the smell of this bathwater was no different from funeral wreaths soaked in sour milk. For Elizabeth, cleanliness did not mean hygiene. To be clean meant to radiate a fragrance and image befitting royal majesty. While courtiers wept in silence from the stench, she still believed her body was purified by sacred perfumes. And from this false belief, skin diseases, boils, and sores began to appear all over her body, signs that the Queen's flesh was decaying even as she sat upon the throne. If Elizabeth's obsession with water caused her body to rot beneath layers of brocade, then her habit of using toxic cosmetics turned her face into a deathly mask. The origin began in the year 1562, when Elizabeth contracted smallpox. Though she survived, the illness left her face deeply scarred. Once praised as delicate and fair, in a court that exalted the divine beauty of the sovereign, those scars were nothing less than a curse. Elizabeth, obsessed with her immortal image, could not allow her subjects or enemies to see such imperfection. Her chosen solution was Venetian ceruse, a white powder made from lead and vinegar, which, when applied, created a smooth, dazzling complexion under candlelight, like a Greek statue. Cour painters, for the sake of their lives, always depicted her with porcelain skin and crimson lips, like a goddess on the throne. But beneath the powder, Elizabeth's face was rotting day by day. Venetian ceruse contained lead, a poison we now know damages the nervous system, disrupts behavior, and weakens the kidneys. Elizabeth applied it daily, in thick layers, to cover scars and new blemishes caused by the very cosmetic itself. Each time her skin peeled, she simply reapplied more powder. Ulcers and oozing sores were sealed beneath, leaving no chance for healing. One lady in waiting recounted that when wiping off the makeup, she saw raw red flesh on the Queen's cheeks. But to speak of it risked imprisonment or even death. Elizabeth did not stop at white powder. She used lip colour made from cinnabar, mercury sulfide, another deadly substance. Those crimson lips were in truth cracked, bleeding, and stained by lethal metals. Each time she smiled, her lips bled, yet she demanded more colour to hide it. Her cheeks were brushed with cinnabar, another mercury compound, for her eyes to glisten. She used drops of belladonna, an herb that dilated pupils, but also caused blindness and hallucinations. Courtiers dared not comment, yet in the privy chambers, whispers spread. Some maids called her face the mask of blood. Once, when a servant accidentally wiped too hard, the powder fell away to reveal an open sore, fresh blood seeping through. She vomited in horror. Elizabeth struck her fiercely, then said coldly, "You see blood, but I see the throne." The toll of poisonous cosmetics went beyond her flesh. Over time, Elizabeth displayed symptoms of lead-poisoning tremors, sleeplessness, erratic moods, her sudden rages. Her accusations of betrayal stemmed from neurological damage. Even her posture changed, fingers curled, back hunched, joints aching. Yet she still commanded painters to portray her upright, her face flawless. At court, truth and illusion coexisted. To the outside world, Elizabeth was celebrated as the immortal Virgin Queen, radiant as a deity. But within the palace, her attendants knew her face was merely plaster over wounds, a deathly mask, consuming her body, and that obsession remained until her final breath, when even in the coffin, her face had to be painted, preserving the illusion of power. If Elizabeth's face was a mask of lead, then her hair was a false crown filled with lice, fleas, and even maggots. In her youth, Elizabeth was famed for her bright red, silky hair, a mark that set her apart and became a fashion model across Europe. But by the age of 30, under the effects of toxic cosmetics and illness, her hair began to fall out in clumps. Only a few years later, her forehead receded, her hair thinned, and the fear of losing her symbol of femininity drove the Queen into a new obsession. In the Tudor court, hair was not merely decoration, but a symbol of strength, youth, and legitimacy. For Elizabeth, revealing a balding head was to admit decline, and so, the court quickly produced elaborate wigs. At first, they were only small bundles of dyed red hair, adorned with flowers or pearls. But over time, as her hair loss worsened, she demanded wigs that grew larger, heavier, until they rose several inches high, curled and ornate like mobile architecture on her head. The materials of these wigs were diverse horsehair, haute wool, even hair cut from maids or secretly purchased from corpses. They were fixed into metal frames, coated with glue made from egg whites and animal fat. When worn, Elizabeth had to secure them with an entire system of pins, clasps, and cords. Some wigs were so heavy that she needed an iron collar around her neck, like a brace, to prevent her spine from breaking. But the horrific truth was this: the wigs were almost never cleaned. Elizabeth believed water would ruin them. And as with her body, she feared contact with water. The result was a build-up of dirt, sweat, and chemicals, turning the wigs into nests of parasites, lice, fleas, and insects burrowed and spread. Once, a daring maid confessed that when removing the wig, she saw white maggots writhing directly on the Queen's scalp. But no one dared speak of it, for insulting the Queen's appearance could be deemed treason. To mask the stench rising from the wigs, Elizabeth ordered them to be dusted with perfumed powder, sprayed with lavender oil and cinnamon. Yet instead of disguising it, the scents only made the musty, rotten odor, sickly sweet, enough to cause nausea. An Italian ambassador once wrote of an audience, "As I approached, I saw upon her head an entire garden, yet I doubted that flowers were the only things blooming there." The ritual of donning wigs was elevated by Elizabeth into a sacred ceremony. Each morning, 3 courtiers, 2 ladies in waiting, and a priest had to be present. The wig was placed upon a red velvet cushion, with incense and prayers, before being slowly lowered onto her head. If a strand of hair happened to fall to the ground, it would be gathered, wrapped in silk, and buried as a holy relic. Once, a wig was so massive that builders had to carve a high arch in the chapel so Elizabeth could pass without toppling it. But beneath the glory lay a scalp full of sores, osincpus, pierced by metal pins and rubbed raw by frames. Physicians begged her to remove the wigs for treatment, but Elizabeth raged, declaring, "My scalp is not for your experiments, but for bearing the crown." That sentence revealed everything for Elizabeth. It was better to endure pain and decay than to let her immortal image collapse before her subjects. Those wigs not only slowly destroyed the Queen's health, but also became symbols of eternal illusion, a crown of maggots, worn until her final breath. Even in death, Elizabeth was buried with her heavy wig, the last mask covering a head nearly consumed by rot. After more than 4 decades of rule, Elizabeth I, the Queen once praised as the embodiment of immortality, at last faced the one limit that even the throne could not preserve: death. But her passing, instead of leaving behind majesty, became one of the most haunting deaths in the history of the English monarchy. In the final months of her life, Elizabeth barely slept, barely ate, sitting motionless for hours on velvet cushions, her eyes sunken, her lips bluish. When courtiers urged her to lie down, she shook her head and whispered, "If I close my eyes, they will never open again." That phrase became a prophecy. Her body, already ravaged by lead, mercury, and chemicals for decades, was so frail that the slightest slip could bring collapse. On the 24th of March, 1603, Elizabeth I breathed her last at Richmond Palace. Instead of resting in peace, her death quickly turned into a nightmare for those present. Almost immediately after her final breath, her corpse began to decompose with abnormal speed. Physicians were bewildered. They blamed the damp weather, the candlelight in the room, or her advanced age. But close attendants whispered a darker truth. The Queen's body had been embalmed in poison for too long with lead, mercury, oils, and perfumes, and now all erupted at once, turning her into a stinking corpse before she had even grown cold. Within only a few hours, the chamber was filled with stench. One maid fainted while changing her gown. Another vomited when touching the peeling makeup that exposed oozing skin. A courtier recorded, "The air was thick, the smell like a garden of rotting flowers." Even the guards around her coffin had to rotate every 10 minutes, unable to endure the odor seeping from the casket. The coffin, lined with red silk and tightly sealed, began after a few days to show dark stains seeping through the fabric. Priests burned extra incense, scattered herbs, and placed bowls of vinegar around the coffin to mask the smell. Some claimed that even as the coffin was carried in procession, the crowd could smell the stench. Flies swarming around the funeral carriage, the embalmers worked through the night. But in vain. When they removed her makeup and wig in preparation for burial, they were horrified to see her face collapsed, cheek sunken, one eye sliding deep into the socket, scalp leaking pus and blood. Later records noted her organs were black as coal, her liver shriveled, her lungs clogged with residue, her bones porous and hollow. Her entire body resembled a failed chemical experiment. To conceal it, the court quickly crafted a wax mask to place over her face, restoring the delicate features long lost. Her hands were covered with gloves, her neck wrapped in thick white lace to hide the sores. The funeral was carried out in the tears of her people, who believed their queen still lay in eternal beauty. But the guards at the coffin knew the truth beneath the red velvet and wax mask. Elizabeth I had dissolved into a mass of perfumes, chemicals, and rot. And so the great queen of the Elizabethan age, the one who defeated the Spanish Armada, who was praised by Shakespeare, who made all of Europe tremble, closed her reign with a death symbolic of all her life. Power could mask the truth in paintings and in ceremony, but it could never conceal the smell of decay. The horrifying death of Elizabeth I not only closed the life of a queen, but also ended an entire era, the glorious Elizabethan age. She had ruled for more than 4 decades, raising England from a small kingdom on the margins of Europe to a power reaching out across the seas. Unter Herein, the arts flourished. Shakespeare wrote immortal plays. Francis Drake circumnavigated the globe, and the English defeated the seemingly invincible Spanish Armada. Politically, Elizabeth stood as one of the greatest monarchs of Europe. But behind the Golden Curtain lay a truth that official history often avoids. Her body was rotting while she was still alive. Blackened teeth and foul breath, toxic powders covering scars, heavy wigs reeking with filth, and the rapid decomposition of her corpse in the coffin. Each detail was not only a reflection of personal tragedy, but a symbol of a reign built upon illusion and the absolute control of image. Elizabeth chose to defy time with the illusion of power. To her, the rotting smile, the thick layers of lead powder, or the wigs crawling with vermin did not matter, as long as her subjects and enemies still saw in her the image of an undying queen. In their eyes, she had to remain the Virgin Queen, flawless, ageless, untouched by illness. But to preserve that illusion, Elizabeth paid with her very body, turning herself into a living experiment of chemicals, a walking corpse before true death arrived. This choice raises a profound question. Was Elizabeth a victim of her own age? In the 16th century, when women were dismissed, a queen ruling a kingdom had to prove herself unyielding and untouchable. Elizabeth understood that the slightest sign of weakness could cost her the throne. Thus, she preferred to endure physical torment rather than let her power falter. Today, in retrospect, the legacy of Elizabeth I remains a paradox on one side, the splendor of a golden age. On the other, the image of a queen living in stench, dying in decay. In Westminster Abbey, she rests beside her half-sister Mary I. Millions of visitors pay homage to her grandeur. Yet few know that in the early 17th century, whispers spread that her tomb still exhaled a sweet, cloying odor, the scent of a body mingled with perfume and rot. History, like Elizabeth herself, often favors appearances. The illusion. Her portraits still shine with white skin, red lips, and a resolute gaze. But behind the layers of oil paint, The truth was hidden. Elizabeth was not immortal. She was only flesh and blood. Her body decayed by the ambition to preserve an undying image. And perhaps that is the lesson her death leaves to posterity. Power can command politics. Art can create symbols. But no one, not even a queen who made all Europe tremble, can escape the raw truth of the body that every beauty, every illusion, will in the end dissolve into dust.